When the flight attendant decided she knew who deserved to fly on private jets, she made a mistake that cost her career. Her words were so venomous they froze the entire crew in their tracks. But the moment she crossed the line was the beginning of her downfall. You won't believe what happened next. Naomi Harris, a 36-year-old powerhouse black entrepreneur, had just wrapped up one of the toughest years of her life. After months of grueling negotiations and countless sleepless nights, she finally closed the deal to acquire Skylux Air, a boutique airline with a reputation for luxury and exclusivity. It wasn't just a professional triumph, it was personal. Every step to the top had been met with challenges, skepticism, and more side eyes than she cared to count. But today was supposed to be her victory lap, a chance to fly to Los Angeles in style and solidify her vision for the company's future. Naomi arrived at the private airport early, her usual blend of punctuality and purpose. She stepped out of her black town car in a sleek business suit paired with oversized sunglasses that screamed, "I mean business." The morning sun reflected off her polished appearance as she walked confidently toward the registration desk. Inside, the air hummed with quiet efficiency, polished floors, muted tones, and that distinct smell of wealth, leather, wood polish, and freshly brewed espresso. But as soon as she reached the boarding area, she was greeted by Stephanie Reed, a 29-year-old flight attendant with icy blue eyes and a smile so tight it could snap. Stephanie didn't know who Naomi was, and the way she squared her shoulders and gave a quick once-over made it abundantly clear she had already made up her mind about Naomi. "Excuse me," Stephanie started, her tone dripping with polite condescension. "I think you might be in the wrong area. This is for private flights only." Naomi tilted her head, her brow arching just enough to hint at amusement. "I know. This is my flight." Stephanie blinked, her practiced smile faltering for just a second before snapping back into place. "Your flight," she echoed, disbelief practically oozing from her voice. Her eyes raked over Naomi again, from her perfectly tailored suit to her designer shoes. "I'm sorry, but people like you don't usually fly private." The words hung in the air like a bad smell. Naomi didn't flinch, but a flicker of annoyance sparked in her chest. She had heard it all before, and yet every time it stung in a way that was impossible to shake. Internally, she took a calming breath. "Not today. You're not giving her that satisfaction." Stephanie, however, wasn't done. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a mock conspiratorial whisper. "Maybe you're with the service crew or—" She chuckled lightly as if this were some hilarious inside joke. "Housekeeping? This area is restricted for clients only." Naomi's lips twitched, almost forming a smile. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. She adjusted her sunglasses and replied in an even tone that didn't betray the fire simmering beneath her calm demeanor. "I've already checked in. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to board my flight." Stephanie's nostrils flared, and she stepped aside begrudgingly, though the disdain in her gaze was anything but subtle. Naomi didn't miss it. Every icy glare, every patronizing word, it all screamed the same thing. "You don't belong here." As Naomi stepped onto the aircraft, she couldn't help but shake her head slightly. Here we go again, she thought. This wasn't just another day. This was a test, one she had passed many times before. But something about this particular morning felt different, like the storm was just beginning to brew. The cabin of the private jet was nothing short of breathtaking. Luxurious leather seats lined with impeccable stitching, polished wooden accents gleaming under the soft cabin lights, and fresh bouquets of lilies on every table gave the space a sophisticated charm. Everything about it screamed exclusivity. But for Stephanie Reed, the blonde flight attendant with an attitude sharper than a chef's knife, this wasn't enough. No, she felt compelled to educate Naomi Harris about her supposed place in the world. Stephanie strutted down the aisle with the kind of confidence you'd expect from someone who believed they were untouchable. Her lips curled into a condescending smile as she stopped by Naomi, who was calmly reviewing documents on her tablet and enjoying the view. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Stephanie asked, her tone syrupy sweet but loaded with venom. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice to a stage whisper. I bet this is the first time you've ever been surrounded by this level of luxury. Soak it in while you can. Honey, because let's be real, it's not for people like you. Naomi paused, her finger hovering over the screen. Slowly, she turned her head to meet Stephanie's gaze. Her expression was calm, almost too calm, like the eerie stillness before a thunderstorm. Excuse me? Naomi said, her voice steady. But I think you're stepping way outside the boundaries of your job description. The words were measured but sharp enough to cut. For a moment, Stephanie blinked, as if caught off guard by Naomi's composure. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. Oh, sweetie, Stephanie sneered, standing straighter and letting her voice carry through the cabin. You really have no idea who you're talking to, do you? Let me spell it out for you. You don't belong here. Naomi's grip tightened around her tablet, but she didn't rise to the bait. Her silence only seemed to infuriate Stephanie further. You're just some. Stephanie stopped herself, glancing around as if savoring the dramatic pause. Then, with an almost theatrical flair, she leaned in even closer. You're just some charity case who wandered in where she doesn't belong. And you know what? I don't have to stand here and pretend otherwise. Before Naomi could respond, Stephanie's smug expression twisted into something far uglier. With one quick, deliberate motion, she leaned forward and spit right in Naomi's face. The cabin fell into a stunned silence. A couple of other crew members who had been prepping refreshments nearby froze mid-step, their wide eyes darting between Stephanie and Naomi. But not a single word left their lips. The tension was suffocating, the kind of weight that presses down on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, her jaw tightening as she fought to keep her composure. She pulled a silk handkerchief from her pocket, moving with a deliberate grace that was more intimidating than any outburst could have been. She wiped her face methodically, her movements slow and precise. Then she stood, straightened her blazer, and looked Stephanie directly in the eyes. You, Naomi said, her voice low and calm, have just made the biggest mistake of your life. Before Stephanie could process the gravity of the situation, the cockpit door swung open. Captain Robert Daniels, a seasoned pilot in his early 40s with neatly combed, silver-streaked hair, stepped into the cabin, his expression a mix of confusion and irritation. What's going on here? His voice was firm, the kind of tone that demanded immediate answers. Stephanie opened her mouth, clearly ready to spin some version of events that would absolve her. But before she could utter a single word, Captain Daniels's eyes landed on Naomi. Recognition hit him like a freight train. Miss Harris, he said, his voice softening as his face drained of color. I didn't realize you were on board already. Stephanie's confident smirk evaporated in an instant. She looked back and forth between the captain and Naomi, her own face now pale. Naomi didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone in the cabin could feel it. Ms. Harris. Captain Daniels addressed Naomi, his voice a mix of surprise and deference. The change in his tone was so abrupt it felt like the entire cabin had taken a collective gasp. I deeply apologize for this incident. We had no idea you'd already boarded. Stephanie froze mid-breath, her head snapping toward the captain and then back to Naomi. For the first time, realization dawned on her face. The woman she had so proudly insulted wasn't just another passenger. No, this was the billionaire owner of the very airline Stephanie worked for. Naomi's gaze was steady, unflinching as she looked Stephanie straight in the eye. Her calm exterior only made the tension in the room more palpable. I have one simple rule, Naomi said, her voice even and measured. A client is a client, no matter the color of their skin. But what I will not tolerate is this kind of behavior from my employees. The weight of her words hit Stephanie like a freight train. She stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. This is all a misunderstanding, she managed, the confident edge in her tone long gone. I didn't know. And you decided it didn't matter. Naomi interrupted, her tone sharp enough to cut through the air. Well, now you're going to learn how much it does. Stephanie's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her confidence had drained entirely, replaced by a look of sheer panic. She looked to the captain for help, but he simply stepped back, shaking his head slightly, signaling that she was on her own. The other crew members, who had been silent witnesses to the entire ordeal, suddenly found their voices. One by one, they began to chime in, offering apologies to Naomi and expressing their agreement with her decision. The shift in atmosphere was immediate. No one wanted to be associated with Stephanie's behavior. Captain Daniels, regaining his composure, straightened his posture. "Miss Harris," he said, his tone now one of utmost professionalism, "I'll personally report this to corporate and ensure that appropriate actions are taken. This kind of conduct does not represent Skyluck's air." Naomi gave him a curt nod before turning her attention back to Stephanie. For a moment, she just stood there, letting the silence settle like a heavy fog. Then, with an air of finality, she said, "You're done here. Gather your things and get off my plane." Stephanie's face crumpled, but there was no room for argument. Without another word, she turned and hurried toward the exit, her once confident stride reduced to a defeated shuffle. Naomi exhaled slowly and returned to her seat, pulling out the silk handkerchief once more to wipe the last trace of Stephanie's spit from her cheek. She glanced around the cabin, noting how the crew now seemed almost overly attentive, their movements crisp and their demeanor respectful. As the engines roared to life and the jet prepared for takeoff, Naomi leaned back into the plush leather seat, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips, not one of triumph, but of quiet satisfaction. She knew this moment would ripple through the company, setting a precedent not just for how clients were treated, but for how deeply rooted biases would no longer be tolerated. Looking out the window as the plane began its ascent, Naomi allowed herself a moment of reflection. This wasn't just about her. It was a message to her team, her company, and anyone else who thought they could dismiss someone based on their preconceived notions. It wasn't just a victory, it was a lesson in respect, delivered at 30,000 feet. How would you have handled the situation if you were in Naomi's place? What are your thoughts on how she stood up for herself? Share your comments below. Have you, or someone you know, ever faced something similar? Let's discuss. Don't forget to like this story if it resonated with you, and share it to raise awareness about the importance of respect and equality. This story was created with a purpose: to shed light on issues of prejudice and inspire positive change. Together, we can make the world a better place.